Good afternoon and welcome to this episode of Governance Briefings. In today's episode, I would like to discuss with you briefly a topic which I believe to be of critical importance going forward, and that is the future of technology companies. After the last financial crisis, of course, regulators, boards, and senior executives have naturally focused on the banking sector. And a number of banks were designated as systemically important institutions with additional capital adequacy requirements that were imposed on them, and focused particularly in the financial sector and the stability of the financial sector. But as we all know, this crisis is different, and the focus on banks would no longer be justified. In fact, the crisis has affected a broad number of sectors, and we've seen an enormous number of downgrades, and the specific numbers are quite staggering. I believe there were about 760 downgrades of non-financial companies only in March and April this year, which is more than the total number of downgrades in 2019 altogether. So the crisis has affected all sectors of the economy. In particular, some sectors like airlines, which look to be in particular dire states. And some of the statements that were previously made, for example, by the American Airlines chief executive Doug Parker, who in 2017 declared, "I don't think we will ever lose money again," look quite, of course, out of place in the current atmosphere. And yet there is one type of companies that has, of course, eluded this sort of downward spiral or pressure in terms of their performance, and that they are the large tech companies. And indeed, the regulators have honed in on this and been looking at the impact, in particular from a privacy point of view, but also from the antitrust perspective, on the impact of large tech companies such as Google, Amazon, and Facebook. And this is very interesting because this debate is taking place on both sides of the Atlantic. It is happening here in Europe with the European Commission's planned Digital Services Act, but it's also happening in the United States, where the Department of Justice is increasingly looking at the anti-competitive behavior of large tech companies such as Google, and has in fact gone forward with an antitrust case against the company, but is also looking at other companies such as Amazon, Apple, and many others. And these conversations are happening from 2 points of view so far. First, from a taxation point of view, where the OECD has labored for a number of months now on a tax proposal, a unified tax proposal on tax companies in Europe, and this is a conversation that will continue going forward in the new year. But also from an antitrust perspective. And the regulators here are, of course, increasingly concerned about the antitrust impact of these large companies. And yet, in today's conversation, what I would like to raise, and this is something that we've put forward in 2 articles that I've authored, one in Aspen Institute and the other one in the London School of Business Review, is that there is an angle looking at technology companies and their impact on our societies and economies and ourselves as consumers of their services, of course, from a governance point of view that has not been explored in either the Department of Justice case or the ongoing conversations at the European Commission level. And this is something that at Governance Center we feel strongly about and will continue working on in the coming year, with a number of proposals to regulators, but also to boards and senior executives of tech companies as to how governance can be better reflected in their ethos, in their modus operandi, and how can stakeholders be better engaged in their decision-making models, which we believe are of critical importance. So it's clear that tech companies will continue being under the spotlight in the coming months, and I think that perhaps will be the most important sector from a regulation point of view. And what we'd like to suggest are a number of corporate governance proposals which could enhance the operation of these companies and their impact on our lives. One of the protagonists of a documentary which has received quite a bit of success, The Social Dilemma, said, and I quote exactly, that if you're not paying for a product, you are the product. And I couldn't agree more with her statement. And believe that a number of governance instruments can be introduced to moderate the negative impact of some of these large tech companies, in particular the large tech platforms such as Google, which do not specifically produce a service, but essentially build their business model around moderating social interactions amongst commercial and private parties. So what could be some of the solutions, the governance solutions that we propose as relevant going forward? First of all, after the last crisis, what we've seen is the introduction of a chief risk officer in banks. Well, we believe that a similar role, called chief technology officer, could also be relevant going forward in the large tech companies. And not only that these officers could report directly to the board. We also believe that there is a role in some of these companies and scope for having a direct board committee responsible for some of these thorny issues of privacy. And that issue could be called, let's say, a technology committee or something along these lines that could specifically address technology risks in these companies. And we believe that it's fundamental that these types of governance instruments exist in large tech companies. Company like Facebook, for example, currently only has, I believe, 3 board committees: remuneration, audit, and I believe risk. And that we think is not sufficient. And we believe that these mechanisms are critical in addressing the impact of tech companies on the consumers. And they could also help resolve some of the thorny issues that regulators are trying to address. We also think that the independence of boards of tech companies can be enhanced, and this can be done by introducing directors specifically appointed by minority shareholders, which has already been done in jurisdictions such as the UK, where a role of a director responsible or appointed by minority shareholders already exists in publicly listed companies. And we think that more generally, the capacity of board members in tech companies needs to be reinforced, because many of the boards of large tech companies do not actually have tech expertise, deep tech expertise reflected on their boards, which could explain some of the privacy concerns and many other concerns that we've seen that regulators are keen to address. We also think that fundamentally there are a number of mechanisms, such as having country-specific boards and country-specific oversight mechanisms that can help address some of the privacy or country-specific concerns around regulations of tech companies. So these are some of the quick proposals that we've made in our recent research on governance of tech companies. And we invite you to have a look at our recent articles, as I mentioned, in Aspen Institute, but also in the LSE Business Review, that go in further depth on these proposals. And we'll be engaging with you on elaborating these proposals further in the coming year. And we'll be hosting a number of webcasts and seminars where you could participate and discuss with us and engage with us on governance of tech companies, which we think is a critical topic for 2021.